Although less than half Catalonia's eligible voters took part in the independence referendum held in early October, which had been declared illegal by Spanish courts, Catalonia's drive for independence has plunged Spain into its biggest political crisis in 40 years. Will both sides mend their fences in the upcoming regional election in December, or will Catalonia-Spain relations fragment further? Will the Catalan vote ignite new moves for independence on the European continent? And how should Europe deal with the rise of separatism and push for integration? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Michele Geraci, head of the China Economic Policy Program at Nottingham University, and Rowan Kelly, China editor and correspondent with the Australian newspaper. We shall also talk to CCTV correspondent Richard Bastic in Barcelona via satellite, perhaps in the second half of our show. And that's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Gentlemen, Madrid has called for fresh elections on December the 23rd ahead of the Christmas festival. Do you think the central government of Spain will be able to secure a better outcome from Catalonia, or do you think Catalonia will become more divided as a result?
Well, the important thing is that they called the election to restore legality, because the country was plunging into a little bit of chaos. Referendum was illegal, went ahead, there was police intervening. This was a very divisive outcome for the last few weeks. So I think the call for election is anyway a good move to restore normality into the country and let people speak again within the framework of a legal authorized referendum, election by the central government. So this is a very positive step, and I think I was talking to friends of mine in Barcelona and in Madrid in the last couple of days, just last night, and I think things are getting a little bit more relaxed, and the anticipation is now for this election, which is where people will put their heart in. Now, who will win or will lose? If we take the results from the Catalonian referendum, it looks that less than the majority of people from Catalonia really want independence.
Rowan, do you expect to have a breakthrough, a surprising breakthrough, coming out of the upcoming elections ahead of the Christmas?
I would expect the Prime Minister to gain the legitimacy that he seeks for his position. And I think people will want this to be settled before Christmas, is a common sort of view. And I agree, I think it was a bold move, but I think it will settle things.
A look at the general issue of a nation state in the age of globalization. On the one hand, you perhaps would have less of the idea on national sovereignty, less idea about the traditional demarcation between nation states, given the momentum of regional integration like the European Union is a very brilliant example. On the other hand, surprisingly, observers in China, which is so far away from continental Europe, and yet we have the issue of Taiwan independence, we followed very closely the process of separatism. So what do you think of the two opposite forces?
Well, there is one force, which is the European Union, let's say, in Europe at least, that tries to unite and lowers the barriers between the nation states to create, now we have an economic integration, it was done many years ago, then we had the monetary integration, we're looking at the political integration, next will be a military integration. So this is one type of force that tries to pull countries together. In Europe, however, if we go back in history, and maybe unlike other countries like China, we were never the countries that we are now. Yes, we had empires, we had, even in Italy where I come from, we had small states, and only in 1861 Italy was united as a country. Before it was real individual municipalities, a small state, the papal state by the Pope, which was very large, and then even in the Middle Ages we had, of course, Florence, Venice, Milan, all these individual city-states. And so, and even Germany went through a process of changes. In fact, it's one case where the country integrated with another one. Eastern and West Germany came back together. So we had a bit of pools going into the splits, and we have a long list. We have Yugoslavia splitting, we have the Soviet Union splitting, the USSR.
The Crimea had been taken back, and the button in eastern Ukraine had also been put under control of the Russians. You have the new dynamics of the reconfiguration, right?
That's true, a push and pull, because the thing, you know, Jan Ray, is when do we draw borders of countries? We also need to know the time at which we draw this. Is it as of now, as of the last 50 years? When did history start? And if we go back 2,000 years ago, everything was Roman Empire. And so it's very hard to say where is the right border of the country. We have the example in Catalonia, we have Asturias, we have Galicia, we have the Basque country in Spain itself. Africa, we know it's been drawn with a pen on a piece of paper to decide where is the border between country A and country B. Same in the Middle East. Countries that really are just they don't have a common cultural base, and this creates this separatist conflict.
I'm originally from Britain, and I think it's very interesting to see what happened there when Britain decided to hold a referendum in Scotland. And to many people's surprise, although there seemed a lot of momentum towards Scottish independence, in fact 55% voted to stay with the Union. And I think that's a kind of a model that people could use elsewhere. People are given a choice, but a good debate takes place. There's accommodation. I think the accommodation is the important thing. Wherever the boundaries are drawn, they're bound to be arbitrary to a certain extent, except for islands. And my view is that as people become more prosperous in the world, so they start to think of other loyalties, their primary loyalties, whether it's to a religion or a local group, a tribe, or to class, or even in the West sometimes to sexuality. So people start to think, it matters to me that I'm Scottish and not British, or it matters to me that I'm Muslim or I'm Catholic and not something else. And so the important thing, I think, is that an accommodation can be found within which many nation states which might appear arbitrary can nevertheless retain people's ultimate loyalty. So you can have cascading layers of loyalty, if you like, which can all be fulfilled at the same peaceful, harmonious time. That's the ideal.
Rowan, do you think the issue of loyalty should also be looked at from another perspective, such as a fresh look at one's ethnicity, national identity, which is described by a European scholar as the imaginary community? And therefore, the Chinese, in the age of globalization, would regard themselves as being more Chinese instead of being changed by Western capitals and ideas. Look at the issue of Catalonia. Less than 50% of the local voters turned out in the referendum. It means at the same time, the general spectrum of public opinions in Catalonia was very, very divided. And this has further complicated the issue of concerning the future of European Union. So what do you think of the diversified sentiments there?
Well, 50% turned out was, of course, a very difficult situation. The police was on the street, beating people up. So I think if this referendum was, if it had been legal and run under normal circumstances, I think more people would have come to the street to vote, to the poll station to vote. So the number was low because it was, almost dangerous to go out in some situation. The other question I have is, like, in this very difficult situation, very difficult choices like Brexit, should people really choose? And should a 51% majority be enough? What if 51% of the people want to stay, for example, in Spain, and 49 want to leave? Or the other way around, I don't care. But can this very big decision be left to the population? Which in some cases, I think in the case of Brexit is one example, that the narrative, the information, the bias led to results that were not entirely in line with the promises. The famous £100 billion on the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, that were never to be found again. And so when people, there is a narrative that it's sold to the people that if you are smaller, if you can run your own smaller country, as in the case of Scotland, as in the case of Catalonia, you will be better off economically. And this idea is not entirely correct, and at the best it's wrong from a technical point of view, and at worst people who do sell the idea, they do it in bad faith. In the case of Catalonia, Catalonia is will be a small province with 7 million people, GDP of 200 billion. Yes, average income per capita in Catalonia is about $30,000 versus 25 for the rest of Spain, but it has been higher even within Spain. So it is not that because Catalonia is large then they should separate, because they have benefited from being part of Spain. And if I may, seriously, who is Barcelona going to play against if we break up Barcelona? You know, there's not going to be Real Madrid, Barcelona, Messi. Poor guy is going to play with some random guys in the small towns in a small region of Europe.
And I think that
and it will be an economic also disaster for the city, also that point of view. Football is important, like you say, culture, religion, that also aggregates people.
Absolutely, and I think I agree with you about the economic question. I think the cost of setting up a nation state is enormous, and people perhaps underestimate what's involved in doing that, and that's one reason why Juncker at the EU is saying we can't cope with 98, because of course the EU itself would have to correspondingly spend vast amounts more money to cope with more nations. Running a nation state is very expensive. I used to live in Papua New Guinea, and in mid-2019, Bougainville, an island in Papua New Guinea, will have a referendum for whether it will become independent. It will cost as much as its entire revenue at the moment in order to sustain itself. Very hard to justify in many ways.
And that's perhaps one of the major reasons why a slim majority in Scotland decided not to support the independence of Scotland in the referendum. You are watching Dialogue with Michele Geraci, Rowan Callick, and Richard Bestick, who is coming to join us in the second half when we come back. We are discussing the issue of Catalonia and what it means for the future of the European Union. Are we going to have the disintegration of this so far most successful regional bloc? We'll figure out when we come back. Please stay with us. Welcome back, gentlemen. Let me go to Richard Bestick, our colleague who's standing by in Barcelona, for his analysis about the latest sentiments concerning how the local general in Barcelona, for example, have reacted to the media fanfare that the independence leader, Mr. Puigdemont, will be put under house arrest on charges of sedition and independence. What can you tell us, Richard, about the local reactions?
Well, I think local reaction has actually been quite bad. The feeling among those who were in support of the independence campaign is that Puigdemont has actually walked away from what now is a terrible constitutional crisis, that he's taken them to the worst crisis in 40 years in Catalonia, and then taken up refuge, it appears, from the Barcelona end of the spectrum, in Brussels. So the Madrid imposed elections on December 21st. Accept the challenge of elections, and you accept that far from being independent, Madrid still can impose elections on Catalonia. Refuse to fight them, of course, refuse to take part in those elections, where those against independence can walk into power. The reality is now that the independence movement in Catalonia is so fractured by the political events of the last week, the last month, that there's very little prospect that they will take any kind of majority in the 135-seat Catalonian parliament. The independence movement is on its back heels.
Now, Richard, since the autonomy of Catalonia has so far been rolled back with a local council and administration being taken back by the central government in Madrid, what's going to happen to the future of Catalonia? On the one hand, do you think more autonomy will be granted to the radical voters calling for independence, or contrarily, Catalonia will be put under more draconian control from the central government? What's your hunch?
I think my hunch is that the direct rule from Madrid is a temporary measure. Madrid has made it very clear that they regard the referendum vote of October the 1st as illegal and a defiance of the Spanish Constitution. Some would say that their reaction has been heavy-handed, but they've made it very clear indeed they are not going to accept any kind of challenge to the unity of Spain, and they will act on that. Their government in Catalonia once again, and got the result, retaken control of Catalonia, if you like, then I think we will see very quickly a return to autonomy here. Quite whether they will make further concessions is a matter they will judge on the day as to whether it's necessary or not. But a return to autonomy will come after those December 21 elections.
Thank you so much, Richard, for being with us. Michele, do you think those radicals in Catalonia will go violent, or it will instead follow the example of a peace process in Northern Ireland, where the IRA surrendered and a leader like Geraci, leader of the political wing Sinn Féin, had always been part of the peace process in the British Parliament? What would happen?
No, I don't believe it will turn violent.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
Now let's go to your country, Italy. Shortly after the vote on Catalonia's secession from Spain, two of Italy's wealthy northern regions, Lombardy and Veneto, voted for greater autonomy. Unlike Catalonia, they are not seeking independence. However, they are richer, very much like Catalonia. So what's the relevance between a richer nation and an underdeveloped part of the same country?
Well, like you rightly said, the Veneto and Lombardia is a completely different thing from Catalonia. It's just about a better management of local resources. There is no indication of any independence. It's just, even autonomy is even a word which is misused. What the Veneto election is about, how much tax should the region hand back to the central government in Rome, and how much should retain it. So the referendum in Italy, first of all, was legal. So it is completely in line with the Italian constitution. It's a consultative referendum. People were asked if they would like to have a greater degree of autonomy in running local matters. And of course, most people, 98%, voted in favor. The central government in Italy agreed that this was a perfectly legal process. And now, let's say, the discussion, or even negotiation, the discussion between those two regions and the central government start on what kind of things, what kind of responsibility. It's about, like, who runs the school, the police, how much tax do you pay, who builds a road, who repairs a road. It's nothing to do with the Catalonia, which is linguistically, culturally, historically wants to really break away from, and it may be much more violent potential.
Gentlemen, we are all humble students of history. I'm not referring back to the demise of the Soviet Union or the peaceful divorce between Czech and Slovakia, so on and so forth, the disintegration of the Yugoslav Federation after the Bosnia-Herzegovina war. I'm talking about for example, what happened back in the year 2009 when the sovereign debt crisis swept through much of southern European countries, with the PIGS economy being the immediate casualty in the crisis. Do you think from then on, Rowan, as an observer of the economics, people in richer nations start to think more about how to be treated more fairly in terms of taxation and financial contributions to the central government? In the case of in the case of China, for example, back in the Cultural Revolution and throughout much of the Cold War, Shanghai had always been the biggest financial contributor to the coffers of central government, and yet in return it got nothing. until 1992, when Deng Xiaoping conducted the silent tour and decided to open up Pudong as yet another pilot program in a case with the Western capitalism. So what do you think of such similarities?
I think that what happened during that European crisis was quite illustrative, that the southern countries, as you say, were feeling they were on the wrong side of history, because the Germans were pulling the strings, as it seemed, but they'd already voluntarily entered the European Monetary Union, and this was a strange an organisation that didn't really have political control, but had the economic control, the monetary control, and so it was a strange mixture which required countries to agree with policies made elsewhere that really affected every facet of their lives. People were understandably upset, but Europe seems to have pulled its way through this, struggled through it, and as a result, Spain now, for example, is starting to build its prosperity back again. Greece is a harder case, but they've worked their way through it. So these questions of centrifugal control, the centre cannot hold, so all the parts break away. I don't think that is the model that we're really seeing most prominent in the world. And even close to Catalonia, we see the model of the Basques, the once violent ETA group, coming to an agreement, cutting a deal with Madrid and finding some solutions to their questions of local loyalty and pride. So I don't see why Catalonia shouldn't do the same thing. But I do think that this is a lesson for central powers to realize we really need to be very attentive to listening to problems that are starting to build up at the outskirts amongst people that we might think of at the periphery, because they can cause trouble.
A look at the relationship between central government and local authorities in the case of China. Let me cite Mr. Chen Yun as saying, he's one of the two members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo in the immediate aftermath of the Cultural Revolution, Deng Xiaoping being the other. He said, because he is known for organizing the central planning policies throughout much of the Cultural Revolution in the first 3 decades since the founding of the PRC. He said without economic authority, the central government would not boast of a political authority. And therefore, we tightened the grip on the taxation for the local governments. Now, having said this, let's go back to what happened to Spain in the mid-1970s. So following the death of Francis Franco, the dictator, Spain adopted the process of democratization. From those days on, it has been moving in the correct direction and got integrated finally with the mainstream society of European Union. Almost at the same time, China, with the 11th National Congress of the party of CPC, Deng Xiaoping decided to open China up. So, are you guys optimistic about Spain maintaining central authority the Chinese way, taking back much of the financial contributions from Catalonia to maintain the political authority in the heartland of the country? Do you see the relevance between the two cases, Spain and China?
The difference is that in China we have a unified cultural, ethnic, 95% people are Han, so there is very little to discuss about differences, and so it's very easy to hold it together. And China has been doing very well since 1978.
At the same time, the most powerful and formidable ruling party in the world,
and a very strong,
to almost 19 million members.
Yes, very strong. In the case of Spain, we have this issue of culture and language that separates. But you know, the thing that is maybe a paradox is Barcelona started to become a really wealthy city in 1992 when they hosted the Olympics. And the Olympics were hosted in Barcelona, because we know the Olympics carry the name of the city, but it was in Spain.
And perhaps the real king and emperor of Spain should be Juan Samaranch, former chairman of
who gave the Olympics to Barcelona and then to Beijing.
Right.
If I could just come back to the China question, I was recently hearing Yukon Huang, who was World Bank country director for China. He's written a very interesting new book about why everyone's been wrong about the Chinese economy, including himself in the past. And he highlighted budgetary issues as one that are emerging as China becomes more prosperous, as something as unfinished business relating to the issue that you raised, relationship between the centre and the regions, as being quite important, because more responsibility is now devolving on the regions in terms of the considerably upgraded social welfare and other provisions that are being required. So there's perhaps some recalibration needed, is his point, in terms of how the budgetary weight goes between the centre and the regions. And while it's worked so far, perhaps there needs to be some new thought on that.
Now, before we come to the conclusion of this edition of Dialogue, a very quick answer from both of you. What's going to happen to Mr. Perjuman, the independence leader? Will he be granted clemency, or he would be sentenced to years of imprisonment behind the bars on charges of rebellion, sedition, and so on and so forth?
No, I think he probably stays out of sight for the next couple of weeks. He can eat Belgian beer and mussels in the meantime.
Waffles, maybe.
Waffles, and also.
Or watch a football match.
And watch the football from there away. But I think there will be maybe some formal charges. He gets charged, and then he never goes to prison. The king can give a grace to when the situation restabilizes, hopefully, in the beginning of the year. Everyone will forget. The problem is to reunite the Catalonian people with each other. The problem is not Catalonia against the rest of Spain. These 2 months have created a divide within the Catalan society, where people in Barcelona, that's what my friends were saying, they were asking each other, are you pro or you're against? So that's the worst effect. And this is unfortunately what politicians strive on. Create a divisive society, and so they lose half, but they get the other half. And Perjuman will never go half of anything. So by dividing it, he at least got close to half of something that you could have only dreamed of.
And jailing him will make him a victim. Victims become heroes, and that makes things much more difficult for everyone.
Thank you so much. Spain, which still enjoys the afterglow of successful democratization in the mid-1970s, following the death of the dictator, would probably have a bright future following the latest and very bad, devastating political crisis concerning the referendum in Catalonia. Let's keep our fingers crossed for a more admirable nation of fashion and football. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.